welcome to What's in the Box. This is Eric. Donna can't make it tonight, but we do have a special guest with us. We are discussing the authors of the Texas AuthorCon, and I would like to introduce everyone to Alex Aaronson.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this is going to be great. And this is one of the things that we've been beating the drum since the beginning. Not everybody that's going to be at this event is going to focus or have their focus on horror.
Right.
And so this is a really cool thing. I want people to know that there's going to be a tons of different things for you to come and check out. You don't need to be a fan of one genre. And in fact, hopefully you're not just a fan of one genre. I read tons of different things. So it's exciting to be able to show everybody that, yeah, we're not just blowing smoke, and that there is going to be some really cool, wide, diverse ideas at the place, and that you can come and check out different books and different writers and all that stuff. But first off, we're going to go through our silly little horror questions. And the number one is, who's your favorite, Jason, Freddy, or Michael?
I got to go with Freddy. I think maybe I'm a Gen Xer, and so I was a little late for Jason. So, but yeah, when Freddy Krueger showed up, it was just you just couldn't get away. I mean,
Right.
there was no running at all.
Yeah.
You could yell at people, "Oh my God, I can't believe it!" Just run, and "Oh no, how did you fall down? Are you kidding me?" But when you're asleep, there's nothing for you.
Right. And I'm smiling like a jackass because the original question was Jason versus Michael. And we've done enough interviews where every time somebody has said, well, I'd vote for Freddy. So the fact that when we added Freddy in and he's still winning, it just makes me smile because I think it's so funny, because it's true. He is the most charismatic of the three.
That's right.
The way I look at it, though, is I'm a huge Jason fan, but I think I'm a huge Jason fan because I'm a fan of the entire catalog of their movies. And when I look at Freddy, I think Freddy, the first one and the third one, they're masterpieces.
Yep.
But then, 2 is questionable, and then 4 and 5 are okay if you're just there for the laughs. Right. And there's some cool kill scenes and stuff, but overall, the movies they fall off.
They really fell off. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I haven't even seen the remake of the, because in my mind, you can't have anybody else play Freddy.
Right.
Really can't get away from that amazing charisma that he has in the first, well, throughout all the movies, but in the first and the third movie, he shines. And so, in my mind, I always pick Jason. I love the Friday movies, but I think, push comes to shove, you do have to vote for Freddy because because he's the only one that talks. He
has dialogue, right? Yeah.
Right. And so you kind of get a little bit of his personality and you can kind of laugh with him. The other ones are just, you're just kind of rooting against the people that they're killing. So
yeah, they have less personality than Bruce the Shark in Jaws.
Right, exactly. And so, and I think in maybe 10 years, we might be adding Art the Clown to this conversation as, a charismatic. He's silent, but he's got as much charisma as Freddy does in the way he does the things he's doing throughout the series. But, we only have those 3 movies. So let's see if that continues to build onto it. Our next question we always go to is vampires or werewolves? Which one do you like to lean to? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I haven't met a vampire one yet. So, and I'm the same way.
When the Lost Boys came out, I was in high school, and there were definitely people that got very vampire obsessed. But yeah, especially I think that in the modern day, with Twilight did us all such a disservice on both ends, but especially on the vampire side.
Yeah, I did kind of cheese it out a little bit. But you're right, and I always lean towards werewolves. I will watch any werewolf movie you put in front of me, but I will avoid most vampire movies because they're just, it's almost like Superman to me. They're just so powerful.
Right.
I find Superman boring. I don't like him as a hero. I love Batman,
Couldn't agree with you more.
And so, and I kind of see vampires the same way. You're like, well, okay, so you really can't die. You're super strong. Some of them can fly. Some of them can change shapes. It's so much that they can do. They're always rich. They're always charismatic. They're always, and so it's kind of boring. But, and then you add on top how cool you can see the werewolves changing, especially before CGI.
That's right.
I mean, as a kid, that's what I gravitated towards, were movies where the special effects were showing us something you're not going to see. It's not as, with CGI, it's a little I don't know. I don't want to say hokey. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but it's commonplace. You know, they can
Well,
really make anything however they want, depending on the budget. But when you watch some of the people from the 70s, 80s doing
I
that
think if
practical stuff, it's amazing.
the best example I think of that is if you compare one of my all-time favorite movies, An American Werewolf in London, to the sequel in like 2000 or
Hmm.
2001, American Werewolf in Paris. And the shots from the first movie just hold up, and maybe some of that's nostalgia. That's a movie I definitely saw when I was way too young.
Yeah, me too.
but but yeah, that really kind of shows that how much they could do with practical effects. That I feel like sometimes creators get a little lazy when they figure, oh well, we've got the CGI, we can do whatever we want, and especially in that case because An American Werewolf in Paris came out not that long after the original, or sorry, it's hard to call it original, but the Star Wars prequels where we
Mhm.
first started getting full characters in CGI. But before Lord of the Rings, where I feel like it kind of got perfected. So it really just shows kind of the limits of the technology.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings, when they got Weta on board, and made their special effects, and they basically said, "Hey, we need a special effects on site, and they're going to do all of the CGI, and I'm going to sit here and make sure it's done right." And then they started doing the programs where they actually have where it actually looks like armies swarming
Right,
and moving and
right.
stuff. Yeah, everything that Peter Jackson did, um, I mean, it just springboarded the whole thing because you watch some of the early CGI stuff before he was, kind of put his stamp on it,
Mm-hmm.
and it is comical.
Right, right.
At the time, I know, I mean, like you was The Haunting and haunted house was it House on Haunted Hill when they remade that. Those
Yeah.
were very early CGI, and the CGI is terrible. But at the time, I remember thinking, "Oh, this is really cool." I mean, it's something you wouldn't normally see. They were able to do something at least a little different that you wouldn't be able to do practically. But now,
I,
when Peter Jackson just blew it out of the water, and and now you can, I mean, you can see sometimes you'll watch a made-for-TV movie that's got really cool special effects, and you're like, "Well, thank goodness that they're starting." That
yeah.
it's gotten to the point where we don't have to have that cheesy decade of nonsense. So
Well, I thought this was one of the most egregious forms of that. And that was the movie Deep Blue Sea. Now, don't get me wrong, I adore this movie. This movie just kills me. I saw it in the theater. I'm a big shark guy,
mhm.
so I already referenced Jaws. 2 minutes into this thing, but uh, so as best I can tell, they didn't want to spend the money or effort to create a second 3D model of a shark. So when they wanted to have a tiger shark, they just took the Mako sharks that they had and reskinned it with tiger shark stripes. And tiger sharks and Mako sharks are literally the opposite. A tiger shark has this rounded, blunt nose, and the Mako shark is like the pointiest nose that you can get in a shark. And it just looked so sad in the theater to anybody that knew anything about sharks. Now, it didn't take me out of the movie very long,
Right.
but it's like knowing that, oh, okay, they build a model and then they can skin it however they want. Understanding how that worked a little later, I was able to kind of forgive them a little bit.
Right, right. No, and I get that totally. Yeah, that movie's very fun. I enjoy that. And that's a movie though you turn your brain off and hope that, just
That's
enjoy
right.
enjoy the journey and hope for the best. But yeah, no, you're right. You could when especially if you're that invested in the creature or the
Right.
monster or whatever, and you have some backstory, then yeah, I'm sure it would jump out right away. I remember seeing that in the theater too.
Yep.
Came out about the same time as Blair Witch, if I remember
That's right.
correctly.
Yep.
Yeah, because I remember going to get some popcorn or something before the movie started, and some guy was berating his 6-year-old about they were in the hallway outside of Blair Witch, and he was yelling at him, "I really want to see this movie. Come on, suck it up. Let's go back in there." And I
Oh
thought,
no.
man, that don't do that to that. The
Oh,
kid is permanently going to be damaged if you do this again. I mean, this kid
that's
was in
right.
tears. So
Oh,
I never saw that. When I came back, they were gone. So, 50-50 shot that he got
that's
to
right.
convince the kid or they went to the car. But
Yep.
um, yeah, I always think of those two things together all the time. But yeah, no, I love it. That Samuel Jackson scene is probably one of my favorite
Yep.
scenes in movies.
I will
Um,
watch it anytime the day. You just bring it. So that and there's the congratulations, you're stupid in 3 languages scene from uh, oh my gosh, why can I not remember the name of the movie?
it's funny
Doesn't
is
matter.
it sounds familiar, but I can't think of it either. So now I'm like,
Yeah, it was Paul Rudd and Stifler from American Pie. Role models
Role model, yes. Oh, yes. When they're yeah,
at the
definitely.
Starbucks.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll watch that and the Sam Jackson motivational speech anytime.
yeah. Okay, so the last one is
Oh,
now.
actually, before you get that, I do want to throw a little bit out to a piece of vampire media that I really like,
Okay.
which was in 1986. Sting put out an album and it had a song that was essentially based on the Vampire of Lestat from Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire.
Oh yeah.
And it's a great song. It's called "Moon Over Bourbon Street,"
I'll go
and
check it out because I'm not a huge Sting fan. I did like the Police, but I don't listen. I never went after Sting himself. Listening to
yeah,
his stuff other than what was on the radio. So
right.
I will check that out because I don't think anybody's ever told me that before. Although I'm not a huge Anne Rice person, but I'm interested in hearing how he
It's a great
turned that
song.
into a
Yeah.
song.
Like
So
I couldn't figure out what the hell it was about for the longest time. In '86, I was what 13. So
right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. Let's see. Okay, so the last thing we got is and I don't know if maybe you don't have one of these because I don't know how much you're into the horror reading horror books, but do you have a favorite uh go-to novel that you would suggest to anybody?
That's it. Because I'm not a deep diver. Mostly my interest is in the movies. But my favorite is cheesy. It's a great movie. It's a really good book. It's literally the only Stephen King book that I've actually managed to finish, and that was Christine.
Oh yeah, no, that's great.
Bit of a gearhead, bit of a car guy. So
Yeah. I think the movie's underrated. So I love the
yeah,
movie. I
I
haven't seen
agree.
it in a while, but I did love it when I was growing up because it was always on TMC. So I do remember getting that force fed into our eyeballs if you had cable back then. So
one of
yeah,
my
no,
buddies
that's a
and
great
I,
one.
one of my buddies and I snuck the VHS when our parents weren't around and watched it when we were in like.
And then right there, that automatically bolts it up your
That's right.
top list. Any movie you
That's right.
saw, I saw Student Bodies that way.
Mm,
Late night. I mean, we were watching on HBO when we are not supposed to be there, sleepover
yeah,
kind of thing. And I've always remembered it as being this amazing movie. And then I recently resaw it and I go, oh no, this is terrible. But I still love it because it has that nostalgia of
that's right.
sneaking up and doing the thing you're not supposed to be doing,
That's
which
right.
is so much harder for kids today because they have it in their pocket. They can
That's
access
right.
anything. But we had to really work at it. If we wanted to do something outside the box, or if we wanted to do anything that we weren't supposed to be doing, we had to earn it.
That's
And so
right.
I think a lot of kids they're missing out on that because it's just so easy for them to just grab stuff. So
Yep.
let's get into what you do. What
Okay.
genre do you like to write in?
Well, I like to colloquially call it war porn. It's basically military fiction with an emphasis on the battles and tactics and equipment. So it's real nerd stuff, man. But yeah, I think that for a lot of us Cold War veterans now, I got a full disclosure. I was in the Navy at the end of the Cold War. Essentially, I signed up right as the whole thing was ending. So I hit boot camp in February of 1992. So
Okay.
the Russians were pretty much done, but I'd signed the papers before that happened. So and I was a
Right.
Russian translator. That was my
Oh, you signed up as a translator?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. That's really
So,
cool.
yeah, it was great. I really, I come from a Navy family, but I was really not too interested in going in until a buddy of mine was like, "Oh my God, do you know that if you join the Army," he was talking about the Army, as a translator, they will send you to Monterey, California for a year just to learn the language, and then you'll go on to your duty station. And I'm like, I could go to Monterey for a year.
Yeah, that sounds like a good deal.
That is one of my favorite places on earth. Never afford to live there if I wasn't in the military, but it's a fantastic place. So the next day I went down to the Navy recruiter, talked to him, and they took me. I had to go down to Los Angeles. I was living in California at the time, and they had me take a test called the Defense Language Aptitude Battery, and it's supposed to judge how well you can pick up foreign languages. And it was just the most crazy bananas balls out test I've ever taken. It had parts of it where it would take a line in English and say, okay, now we have a new rule of grammar, and that is that before the verb always has to have the prefix ya. And so you jump would be, instead of jump, now it's you jumped, because now you're indicating that that's the verb. Or and so then they would give you all these different crazy rules, and then you would have to, like, write and fill in blank and stuff to show that you were picking up on the rules. There was one part of the test where you had to pick out where the tonal emphasis was. And I mean, as a European language guy, I was like, I don't know. I'm not a music guy.
Yeah.
I hope I'm getting these right, but that I think that would have kept me out of the Asian languages, because
Yeah, for sure. I did 2 years in high school and 4 semesters of French in college, and yeah, no, I wouldn't have been able to do any of that. So and I definitely knew I wasn't gonna be able to do anything in the Asian section. So
I took 2 years of German in high school, and I thought I was just the best. I was just the smartest at it. But it turns out I actually was pretty talented. So I scored high enough on the test that I got to pick my language. And growing up in a Cold War Navy family, I'm gonna be Jack Ryan, man. I'm gonna learn some Russian.
yeah, I grew up in Army. And then when my parents got divorced, she remarried back into the Army. So there was a small little sliver of time when I wasn't really associated, other than through my father, who was already stationed overseas at that time. So I didn't see much of them. But yeah, they got right back into it. So yeah, we're a big military fan. My wife her father served and was in Vietnam and stuff, and her brother served in the Army as well. So we're a big military family. So thank you for your service and all that.
Trust me,
I know.
I got so much more out of the Navy than they got out of me.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's funny though, because when I was growing up, my buddy was a couple years older than I was, and he got into the Air Force, and he ended up getting shipped to Alaska, and he ended up driving a bus. So I thought, well, that sounds boring. He came back 30 pounds heavier than he left.
Right.
Sign me up for the Air Force. What the hell? So, but yeah, no, that's cool. So I guess you've got this experience, and so you're using your experience to give us some stories in the Cold War era, huh?
Yeah. So what essentially I just needed a project. I always wanted to write, and this was about 4 years ago. I decided to write a short story about what it might look like if Operation Eagle Claw was a success. Now, for viewers that don't know, Operation Eagle Claw, that was the Carter administration's attempt to rescue the American hostages that were in Tehran, Iran. And in our timeline, first of all, just big picture, this operation was doomed to fail. They were begging it to fail by the time they called it off. It was overly complicated. It used all.
It always is. It always is when they get involved.
But I was watching an interview with Jimmy Carter, and they asked him, "Well, what would you do differently?" And his answer just cracked me up, because he's like, "Well, I would have sent one more helicopter." Because what happened was there were 8 helicopters, and they needed 6 to 8. That's 5, buddy. 8 helicopters, and they needed 6. So when the 3rd helicopter broke down, they were like, "Well, we got to abort now." I didn't think it was going to be quite that easy. You needed more than just one more helicopter to make that happen. But I picked it up and I ran with it, and so I ended up with about a 30,000 word short story on Operation Eagle Claw. And in doing it, in writing it, I learned so much. I basically had to teach myself how to write dialogue. I had no idea. I went to law school. I know how to write a paper, but I have no idea how to write a conversation. But that exercise kind of emboldened me a little bit. So I reached out to a couple of authors that I read, and if I could grab their contact information, I reach out and say, "Hey, what advice do you have?" And one of the guys I reached out to was James Rassone, and he's pretty big in the indie military fiction. Now, I do alternate history. His genre is really future wars, and he's really good at telling us what's going to happen. A lot of times, stuff that we see come out, like with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You're like, oh yeah, I guess James kind of called it on that one.
Right. So actually, he writes horror too, right? In just a different way. So
Yeah, he's definitely a war porn guy.
Very cool.
But and he was like, hey, well, why don't we work on something together? And so I actually worked with him on two books in the series that he's currently writing, which is called Monroe Doctrine, and it's about a future war with China that starts in 2024.
Okay,
Uh,
that sounds cool.
yeah, I co-wrote two books on that, and it was really cool because he really took care of all the plot, and I just got to put my characters in there to talk about it. And he really let me run with my scenes because I was essentially writing about NATO and Russia, the Russian Federation, fighting against China as very unlikely allies. And how does that look? How does that work?
Sure.
Whereas the rest of the book was dealing with China and the United States and fighting in Venezuela and Cuba. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and that really got me into that kind of cooperative stuff. And he stuck with me for the start of my series, which is the Soviet Endgame, which it started with that Eagle Claw piece, but it grew quickly beyond that. So there's a lot of political intrigue. There's I don't know if your viewers would be too interested, but it's a big
Oh no,
universe.
I think they would be. You'd be surprised. Most of us read a lot of different things. I think this sounds very interesting.
I ran into a bit of a problem. So I actually did the whole draft, the whole first draft myself, and then handed it over. And I said, look, I know what the problem is. This thing is not, this doesn't flow correctly. So we need to figure out how to fix the beats so that, we can make this thing high speed. And when Miranda is James's wife, and she took the first crack at a read through, and I mean, she was like, "Okay, so this scene and this scene and this scene, these all got to go, man. I'm sorry. This is. I appreciate that this is interesting to you, but 90% of your readers are going to mutiny on you. They're not going to get to the good stuff because you're too busy explaining to them." How the Soviet government was constructed in 1980 or
Yeah,
1980.
right. No, I totally get that. I mean, and that's a good thing that you have somebody who isn't nerding out over it and can get through it and tell you, hey, this needs to go. It happens even when you're writing complete fiction and nonsense. Because sometimes people want explanations, but then they don't. You got to find that sweet spot.
You got to find that sweet spot. And
Yeah.
well, I mean, it was a really good exercise because it was about, okay, you have to get some information out. You got to cut out some of the fluff. But okay, so let's take these two scenes and condense them into one scene. So that means you're gonna have to change this character over, and it was just moving stuff around. And it really came together. And it's funny because when my wife was, of course, the first person to read it, and when Lacey read it, she's like, you really need to start this thing off inside the embassy on the day that the hostages get taken. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Mostly, I couldn't figure out how to write it, and
Right.
because it was so much research. I felt like I couldn't, because it's based on a real event. I really needed to get a deeper understanding of what was actually going on, and I was being lazy and I didn't want to do it. But when the publisher says, no, you really need to start this thing in the embassy on the day of the hostage.
Yeah, I noticed my wife doesn't like horror. In fact, she hates horror. She doesn't read anything. She's read my first book when it was probably 3 versions before I actually released it. But
Yeah,
other than that, she hasn't really read much. And yeah, but even she, she'll say something and you need to do this because I'll explain what I'm trying to do, but she won't read it. But yeah, they always seem to have the right idea. And I guess it's because they're not in the trenches with us as we try and figure out what we want to do and stuff. They come at it with a different a reader's eye. And
yeah.
so it's always I've learned my instinct is immediately to just dismiss it, but I take a step back and listen. No, she's right. And I know
Yeah.
I'll be here in a week. I might as well
Yeah.
just skip that week of being an idiot and I'll just do it. So yeah, she's helped me a lot with a lot of those trying to figure out the way to capture something or start something and things of that nature. And she doesn't even read this stuff. So I mean,
Right.
I think that's a special talent. I think that's what all wives seem to have, right?
I think they have to if they're going to put up with us.
That's what I think. Yeah. Yeah, she's like, just to get this over with, just to get this conversation over with. I don't want to talk about this stuff anymore. Let me tell you how to fix it and get out of here. Um, I can see there's two posters behind you. I assume that do you have two out
Yeah,
already, or do you have more than
that's
the
right.
two out?
I have, well, I do have the two Monroe Doctrine
Mm-hmm.
books out, and then these are the first two Soviet Endgame books. You
Now, do
have
you,
Advanced Contact, so that's a CH-43, or I'm sorry, CH-53 Sea Stallion helicopter. That's what the Marines flew into what they call Desert One, which was a refueling state place. But they were essentially going to land those helicopters in a soccer stadium and evacuate the hostages once they've been rescued.
mm-hmm.
And then the second one is called Fire and Maneuver, 1981, and that's a T-55 tank that the Poles used in the early 80s. And one of the point of view characters in the second book is actually it's a Polish T-55 crew. So
Now, is this an open-ended series, or do you have a plan?
I got a plan.
Okay.
I got a plan. It's a little ambitious, but yeah, I'm gonna 5 books on this and get us to the end of World War III, and then uh, if I'm still feeling it, if this is still a thing that's rewarding
Mm-hmm.
to me, I've definitely got the potential to pick it up again in like the 2000s.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I kind of had the same thing with I have one series called Dawn, Texas, where I kind of did it so that it bounces around time so that I can not be bored with the idea of a haunted, a cursed town with a haunted scarecrow. I thought, well, maybe I'll be hitting the same note, but by making it jump through different time periods, I'm allowed to. I can study, I have one set in 1865, so I've got a little bit of a Western. Then I go back to 1926. So you got to study all that stuff. Got one set in 2002. So I get to jump around a little bit. And I found that's the way to keep it fresh for me. So it sounds like you have the exact same thing. You got the plan set out and then you can jump if you want to. That sounds really cool. So, I mean, who are some of your bigger influences? What kind of books do you read in this genre?
It really is. It's really two separate branches. You have the war porn on one side, which
Mm-hmm.
is okay. Tom Clancy, Harry Croyle. Yeah. Now, of course, everybody's leaving my brain, but
Yeah, I'm the same way.
there's a lot of one-offs on that too. Like there's this book called "The War That Never Was" by a guy named was it Michael Palmer? Yeah, that's just a one-off. He wrote that book, and I think that's the only one. There's a book called Arclight, which, and again, the author escapes me right now. But basically, any of the military thriller guys from the 80s.
Do you like Nelson DeMille?
I'm not really that into it. So I trying to think. I really kind of get niched into kind of specific areas. So
Well, he's less war porny, I guess, and
yeah.
more broad story, but he did focus heavily on military stuff and Soviet stuff in his earlier stuff, works. And then he kind of started doing the characters where he kept doing the same character showing up in a whole bunch, like General's Daughter. That guy's got like 3 books, and then he's got what was that, John Kerry, I think's the character, and then he's got another character that's shown up in a few books, and he's kind of gotten away from it. But his early stuff I always found to be very interesting, but it's not super technical. I mean, there's some explanation, but it's not like Clancy. I don't see it like Clancy at all.
And we also have, and if you go to Twitter, there is a Twitter community called War Porn, and I think we have the there's only like 61 of us, but we have the highest concentration of Cold War turns hot alternative history. So there's a bunch of guys on there that write it well. And so yeah, if you're into this at all, that's a great resource because you can interact with a lot of readers there, or I'm sorry, a lot of authors there.
That's cool. Yeah, and it's a super interesting genre. I mean, even like the shows. I mean, a lot of these shows that are popping up now are being based on a lot of this kind of stuff, and we're kind of getting more into that 70s, 80s Cold War era kind of things. And so it's really interesting to go and be able to find somebody that's writing in that era, about that era, with knowledge of actual events and procedures and things of that nature, not just somebody blowing smoke out. So I think that's
Right.
really cool. What was I going to say? I had a question and I just blinked. Um, so at the event, you're going to have these two books and you'll have some of the Monroe stuff.
Yeah, what I think I'm going to do is I'll definitely have these two books, and I'm going to go ahead and have some of James's work there too.
Okay.
He's not going to make it. I live in in the North Dallas suburbs, so I'm right there. I've been to the Renaissance a bunch. I love that hotel.
It's going to be cool. Yeah, we were in a much smaller location last time, and this is going to be really nice. When
Yeah,
Merrill,
it's a great hotel.
yeah, and the layout's really cool, and I think it's going to be a fun way. And I just remembered the question I was going to ask. I like to. I went through a phase of alternative history, like the Nazis win, or
Right,
like
right.
Fatherland. Robert Harris
Yeah.
does a really good job of writing those kind of
Mhm.
books. Um,
That was what I was going to say. Is that it's the two prongs. You have the war porn over here, and then you have the alternate history because that is so much fun. And the farther you get away from the point of departure, the more fun you get to have with it. So, the best example of combining the fun of the alternate history with the hardcore war porn nerd is, okay, you look at the situation, what's happening, what kind of effect is that going to have? So, in the 1970s, we were considering updating the F5 Tiger to be able to carry Sparrow missiles. Doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but basically it would just really, really increase the functionality of the aircraft. Carter said, no, we can't do that because of the Iranian Revolution. And so the Iranians suddenly ended up with the most advanced air-to-air missile in the world, the Phoenix missile, and now they're bad guys. So we can't do that anymore. But if there was a World War III, well, I think they would suddenly start doing that. Okay, well, what are the downstream effects of that? Okay, Northrop has a factory in Los Angeles that builds these aircraft. In our timeline, it gets repurposed to build the F-18 Hornet. Well, right now we need F-5s. We don't need F-18s. We're not going to suddenly change into a new plane in the middle of this. So that factory no longer is going to make F5 or F-18s. It's going to make just F5s. Okay, well, what are the downstream effects of that? Oh, well, now we suddenly have a surplus of and again, this is this ridiculous nerd factor 11. Well, now we have a surplus of GE F404 engines that were supposed to go into the F-18s. Well, what do we do with those? Oh, we put them on the F-5s. And they really did that. Northrop really did that in our timeline. They called it the F-20 Tiger Shark. It was, the greatest plane to never exist, never fly.
Right. And to me, that sounds really interesting because, as you said, it's kind of nerdy in the background. But as a reader, I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to think it all the way out. And then I know when you put it in the book that you're going to channel it in a way that's entertaining and enjoyable and not going to make me pull the book back and think, okay, now what the hell did I just read? I don't
It's
understand. Right.
it's
So no, and I think that's a special talent. I mean, I tip my hat, because that is a talent that you guys seem to have and can do if it's done well. But
right.
if it's not done well, people will recognize it immediately. And then so you can easily kind of filter those people out of the whole process.
I will tell you, and I knew it was going to happen, but I just couldn't tell the story any other way. Um, as a person, I'm not a big fan of President Jimmy Carter. I thought he was ineffective. I thought that, from a foreign policy perspective, he was just naive. All these things, and I was so against him when he was in North Korea, selling us out to the North Koreans back in the 90s when they first were developing their nuclear program. So I'm not a fan of Jimmy Carter, but oh my God, there are Amazon reviewers. I know I have like 5 or 6 of my 505 reviews are specifically saying, well, no, I only have I have 505 ratings, but the 1-star reviews are almost always, I can't believe how much this guy loves Jimmy Carter. I was so scared.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not how Carter would have acted in any way, shape, or form. And I'm like,
Right. Yeah, no, I totally get that. Well, the little things flash in to tell me that I think we're almost out of time. So I don't want it just to cut off short. So I just want
sure.
to say thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me,
And
man.
I want to let you know all the links are going to be below so people can go find your website and go find your books on Amazon. And they can find you on Twitter. I'll get that
Oh
link
yeah,
up too.
I'm on Twitter, Facebook. I'm most active on Twitter, although to be honest, the effing day job has really been eating into my social media time.
Right. I think it's unfortunately for everybody that's happening,
Yeah.
but we'll put it up there so everybody can reach out, and you guys need to come to the event and you can see that we have things other than horror. And I mean, you got to come grab these 2 books. You got 2 of
That's
the
right.
5 already there. So we'll come check these out, and then we will, well, hopefully we'll have you back on, after the event or as going into next year, and we
Yeah,
can talk about the
anytime.
next stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Talk to you guys later.